Hello and welcome to this Southwark Cathedral Podcast. Today I'm in conversation with Joe Berry. Joe came to speak at the cathedral to our community of the Cross of Nails event that we had at the end of last year to talk about reconciliation, and at that meeting she told us her story, the story about her father, who was an MP, who was murdered in the Brighton Hotel bombing on the 12th of October 1984. And that huge tragedy and trauma in Joe's life has led her on such an incredible journey, which she tells us about in this podcast and conversation that I had with her. I know that you will be inspired by her, as we all were that night, and I commend very warmly the work of Joe's charity called Building Bridges for Peace. So here is my conversation with Joe Berry. Joe, thank you so much for joining us here on this Southwark Cathedral podcast. We're very, very grateful to you for joining us. And are you well? How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. It's raining outside, but I'm very happy to be speaking with you today.
Well, it's great to see you again, because we first met when you came to the cathedral for Community of Cross of Nails event that we had on reconciliation, and you seemed to be the most obvious person to help us begin to think through what that word might mean. And when I heard you, I just thought I would love so many more people to hear your story, and here you are. So I just wondered, for our hearers' benefit, whether you could just take us through your story.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you for having me. So my journey starts a very long time ago, in 1984, when I was just 27. My father was killed in a terrorist attack. He was a Conservative MP and attending the conference in Brighton at the Grand Hotel, and the IRA said they were responsible by the end of the day. I didn't just grieve for my dad, who I adored and was very close to, but I also felt from the moment I heard he was killed that I was now part of a war. I was part of a violent conflict. How it happened was really important to me. And so 2 days later, I made a decision. I made a vow to bring something positive out of it and to try and understand those who'd killed my father. And a journey started, a journey with no map, a journey with a sense of, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to trust that life will bring me the experiences so I can bring something positive out of it. I mean, this is before you can Google how do you bring something positive out of a terrorist attack. These days you would find so much, but back then I was very on my own, but very, very determined. And within a few weeks I had my first experience that gave me the direction. And I ended up sharing a taxi with a complete stranger in London. We were both looking for taxis. There weren't that many, so we shared one. And he came from Belfast. So I asked him, I said, this is a very odd question, but I'm wanting to understand why someone would join the IRA. And the newspapers are just giving me this sort of dehumanized picture, so I can't understand the story behind the people. Can you help me? And he said, that's not an odd question at all, because my brother was in the IRA, and my brother was killed last year by a British soldier. So this is 84. We should have been enemies. We represented different sides, and yet we spoke of a world where peace was possible, where there was no hatred, there was no violence. And I left that taxi thinking I can build a bridge across the divide. And even though no one knew I'd done that, I felt like I'd made my first contribution to peace. And that took me to Northern Ireland in 85 and 86. I met people, I communicated with people who were in prison. But it was only when we had the peace process that my life changed in a drastic way again. The one person who was sentenced for planting the bomb was called Patrick Magee. And he came out of prison in June 99, early. I think he'd still be in prison now. But part of the peace process was that the political prisoners came out in 98 and 99. And that was a shock. I didn't know he was coming out of prison. I remember watching the TV and seeing him walk out as a free man. And I felt angry, first of all. I thought, well, he's free. He's got his life back. My dad can't come back. How is this justice? But then I thought, this means less people are going to be killed and less people go through what I and my family and many others have gone through. So I welcomed it. And then the idea came to me of meeting him. And it took 18 months of me traveling to Northern Ireland, taking part in post-peace process workshops, talks. There was a time where there was a lot of resources of people from England to travel over who'd been affected by the conflict. And every time I went to Northern Ireland, I felt alive and it was part of my healing. And I eventually found someone who arranged the meeting. It was the fourth attempt. And this is not done in a special place with facilitation. This is a friend's house in Dublin. And I was terrified. I was on my own traveling from Holyhead in North Wales to Dublin, wondering, how am I going to feel when I'm with him? How will it feel to look into his eyes? All these years, I've not wanted to blame him. I want to understand, but I don't know how I'm going to feel. And then I'm at my friend's house, and I still remember the moment where he walked in, and I got up and shook his hand and said, thank you for coming. And he said, no, thank you for inviting me. And we started talking straight away. We went to our own room and back of the house, just him and I. And it was a 3-hour talk, very intense. Looking back, I think I listened to him in a way I'd never listened to anyone before. And I went there not to tell him he was evil or bad, not to get an apology, but to see him as a human being. That was it, just to rehumanize him. And I asked questions and I listened to him. I even shared a poem I've written for him. And all the time he's talking, I've got these parts of me that I find it quite difficult to be there. Like there was a voice saying, you shouldn't be here, Joe. This is betraying your father. He's killed your father. You should go now while you can. Another voice looking at him and going, you don't look like someone who could kill. But then more than that was the part of me just wanting to be really present to him. And he started off by giving me a lot of political justification, which I knew he would. He was coming from a place of, we had a right to violence because we were oppressed. We didn't have human rights. They saw themselves as freedom fighters. And I was familiar with that, but I wanted to go deeper. So I asked questions, and I remember a time when I looked in his eyes and I realized like how much he'd suffered, how much his community had suffered, and that for him, this was a response to what he'd experienced. Now, for me, violence, I don't think it ever works. I think the legacy is too great. But it humanized him for me to see him as a human being who had his own trauma, had his own feelings. So that's the point where I thought, I'm going to go now and no one will ever know I've met him. I hadn't told anyone. And this has restored something the bomb took. This has given me back something that was robbed when the bomb went off. But it's quite hard. It was very hard hearing him justify killing my father as a legitimate target. That was difficult. So as I'm prepared to thank him and go, that's when he changes. And he looked at me and he rubbed his eye and he said, I don't know anymore who I am. Can I hear your pain and your anger, and what can I do for you? And I knew that he'd taken off his political hat, and what had just been my need to meet him now became his need to meet me, as he began to realize that there was a cost to his humanity through using violence, and that my dad was not just a legitimate target, but a real human being, and that he was guilty of dehumanizing the other in the same way he accused the other of dehumanizing him. And it took a second, but the words took longer for him to communicate it. But it was a very different conversation. He's asking questions about my dad. He's wanted to know how I felt, and he's no longer using the word we. He's talking about I. It's much more personal. It's emotional. Another hour and a half had passed, and that's when I knew I couldn't listen anymore. And I thanked him, and he then said, "I am really sorry I killed your dad." Now, I didn't go for that apology, but what I received from that was him now saying my dad is a real human being, and that did mean something to me. And I said to him, "I'm so glad it's you," and then left. And we met 3 weeks later, and his first question was, "What did you mean by I'm so glad it's you?" And I said, I couldn't have predicted or assumed that you would open up and start your journey and make the changes you've made and see my dad as a human being and want to engage with me. And I'm very grateful for that. And it's now 25 years later since that first meeting. And, I still feel that yes, it's been hard, it's been challenging, I've stopped sometimes, but actually his preparedness to engage with me has been really difficult for him. And I know that it takes courage. I think once people have used violence, it's a very hard journey to come back. And we have become friends. It's an unusual friendship. It's a friendship based on what happened to us, how we met, but is also now built on the shared experiences we've had, the places we've been to together, the talks we've given, the people we've met, the trust that's built up over the last 25 years. So it is an extraordinary relationship. Still can surprise me, and I'm still learning from it. Didn't meet him to change him, it was to change and transform myself, and that's still happening.
And you go around together occasionally to give talks together. How are those talks shaped? How do you, as it were, communicate together this story in front of an audience?
Yeah, we do share platforms together. We've lost count over probably 300 times.
Really?
And we don't prepare. It's always different. We might decide who's going to start. And then we might, we love the questions, but we probably speak twice first and then open up for questions, which is sort of always been our favourite bit. And I never know exactly what he's going to say. He responds to who's in the audience. He responds to how safe he feels, and it's very live. It's not like we're preparing something. Like people can feel it still. And there's a new documentary that's coming out about us, The Hardest Bridge, which is a non-profit. It'll be available for everyone soon. And that I think will be amazing, because in the documentary you can really feel that this is not something that we met and then we sail off into the sunset all happy. That there are still difficult times and challenges, and I think that's the nature of this work. It is emotional work. It's not something you just do with your head and then kind of it's done. It's different each time, and we convey that in our talks. And then what happens when we stop talking is people then make it their conflict. It's all reflected back to them in a new way. So people then look at what's going on in their lives, and we're all carrying trauma, I believe. We've all been hurt, and we've all hurt as well. And then people make it their own and make the changes that they want to make, or not. That's completely up to them. We're not ever saying people have to change. It's just an offering that we're giving.
And when you said at the beginning of your very moving story that very soon after your father's murder, you made a vow that you were going to make something positive out of this rather than negative. What was behind that in you, do you think? Why Why did you respond that way and not perhaps a more understandable way, which might be one of anger, vengeance, depression, and so on? What do you think was going on in you that made you respond like that?
I think I saw it as a choice. I could go the revenge route and become bitter, but I'd already been interested in peace. I'd written an essay about Gandhi. I'd studied meditation, and I thought, as a teenager, I thought deeply about peace, and that was something that I think I thought the way to peace was through meditation. And when the bomb went off, that did not seem relevant anymore. I thought meditation isn't going to stop wars and terrorism. Something different's needed. And that helped me, I think, make the decision, because who was I? If I gave up on everything I believed in at 27, I didn't know how I was going to survive. So it was also about survival. It gave me meaning and somewhere to go in my life, because I couldn't go back to the person I had been. And some members of my family could, they could go back, of course, with massive grief and shock and trauma, but they had somewhere to go to. I really didn't, because I saw my life as someone who was contributing anyway to peace. But I didn't have the how. My emotional intelligence was very low back in the 80s. And I didn't know, I didn't know what to do with my anger and my pain and trauma. And it wasn't that there was any help offered with that. So hasn't been a straight route. There've been some very difficult episodes in my life where, I was not really able to heal my trauma and I was feeling it. Looking back on it, if in 84 we did know about trauma, it would have made my life so much easier. And that's one of the other things that I do, is make sure that people affected by terrorism now in the UK do have the ways of getting the help that they need and they deserve. And that's with another charity that I work with. But it's about not wanting other people to go through the kind of pain that I've gone through, and seeing that though I can understand violence, it's not going to get us the peace we all really deserve and crave for. And I think that's grown over the years, But I'm not sure it's quite being a pacifist, because it's more, I understand the roots of violence, and I think it's really important. And I know I'm capable of violence, I know that in me. And it's how can we create a world where people have different options available to them. Patrick Magee would not have chosen violence if we look at conflict in a different way. Now, it does not excuse what he did at all, because he did kill not just my father, but many others. But it's about recognizing that as a world, there's responsibility there, that we haven't yet learned how to resolve conflict without making someone wrong and the enemy and dehumanizing them. And like right now, there's a lot of examples of that.
And how about other members of the family? How have they responded to your approach, your response to this awful situation?
In many different ways. We're a very close family, and that's what's most important. And I'm really careful to not impose what I believe and what I work onto them. I wait to be asked, and I'm sensitive to that. The friendships, the love that's there is strong enough, I feel, to build support, even though some of them might at times, and I know they have found what I've done really difficult. I remember going public in 2001 with a documentary, and it was on the BBC, called Facing the Enemy. And I was so worried about the effect of my family and my loved ones, and thinking, is this going to make it worse for everyone? And I didn't know. And the only thing that sort of carried me with a little bit of strength to say, yes, I'm going to go ahead and go public, is the sense that I'm trying to change the future with this. We can't change the past. I think revenge is when we're trying to change the past and make it better. But this is an experiment. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but it's something I want to do to change it for our children and their children. And it's an offering to the future. And that gave me a strength. I thought if one person watches Facing the Enemy and makes some positive change, then it's worth it. And at the same time, I was really able and happy to speak to people who did find it difficult. And there have been people who have found it really, really challenging and accusing me of betraying my father, which I really understand.
Do you have any sense of how your father would have responded to your approach?
I think he would understand. He realised that I was living my life slightly differently to others. And he made a huge effort to try and understand my values and where I was coming from. But last week I went to Windsor Castle to get my CBE, which I'm still in shock I've got a CBE for peace and reconciliation. And there was someone there who was like sort of in charge of everything, and he said to me, my dad and your dad were friends, and my dad would be so proud, even though he's died, that you're here getting a CBE. And I just took that as, yeah, I keep on hearing the message, and I'm not doing this to be liked, I'm doing this to create impact. And so to have that as a personal message was just incredible and very, very moving. So I think yes, he loved all his 6 children, and his priority was always trying to help us and understand us and love us. He was the most incredible family man.
And what he gave you in that respect, I would have thought is the fruits of which we're listening to now. I and many people listening to this will have heard me speak about it, and I'm not going to repeat it myself, but I had a similar but also very different experience of I was brought up by my grandparents, and I was once in a taxi in the city where my grandfather had been part of the bombing campaign in World War II in
Wow.
Nuremberg, and when I happened to tell the taxi driver that my grandfather had been in my heart, because I knew that on the 14th of February 1945 he'd flown in the bombing raid, the taxi driver then quietly told me that was the night his mother had been killed.
Oh my God.
And he pulled the car over, and he just turned round to me in the back and put out his hand and said, and now you and I shake hands. And we shook hands, and we didn't say anything more, except that when I went to pay, he wouldn't take my money and said that we would remember this for the rest of our lives. And he's right. And I don't know the name of that taxi driver, but it's seared into my memory and into my heart, actually. And what I have often thought about in that experience is that whatever reconciliation is and whatever it means, it is certainly about some loyalty to the future rather than a focus of loyalty to the past, because he could have been vengeful, he's lived with his loss, and I hadn't. But that sense of loyalty to the future is what I hear when I hear you. Is that how it feels from within?
Yeah, I got shivers down my spine when you shared that story. It's amazing. It's also a taxi. And like you, I don't know the name of the young man who changed my life. It's extraordinary. Yeah, I think it is a loyalty to the future and a belief that we can see the humanity in everyone. That your guy in the taxi, the driver, he chose not to see you as the enemy, but as a human being, and therefore changing history, changing life, changing the future. I think every time we meet someone who represents our other, and we choose to see them with their full humanity, we are creating real change. And it's the most important work we can do is rehumanize each other. And there's legacies left everywhere, isn't there? Like every country's has experience of being an enemy and a perpetrator as well as being victims. And how do we change that cycle of violence and revenge? That's the question.
So the times that we're living in, Joe, at the moment, there's a lot of othering going on. There's a lot of making of enemies, and a lot of vengeful talk. Why do you think we're seeing and hearing this so loudly at the moment? And is it something that concerns you?
It concerns me every day.
Yeah.
It seems that our understandable pain and suffering is now being linked to blaming your group, blaming your community, and it's strengthened by politicians, governments, media, leaders, that we have a right to blame other people for our pain, and that we have a right to be, well, it's almost like a self-righteousness that allows us to dehumanize you. And I think it starts as a thought, that sort of self-righteousness, and then it grows, and the more we demonize people, the more we can harm them. Patrick now knows he couldn't kill my dad because he knows him through me. And I think when we really see people in their full humanity, we're going to care for them. We're going to want for them to have their needs met like our loved ones. There's that, I call it like unbounded empathy. But at the moment, it seems so easy to hate. I don't think hatred is an emotion. I think hatred is a combination of feelings and thoughts that I'm having these problems. I'm feeling this because of other people, and then blaming and then dehumanizing them. And how do we change that? I mean, that's what my work is about. I'm doing what I can to change it, and many other people are. And I've been listening a lot to people in America who are experiencing terrible hatred and violence, but I'm also hearing about the kindness, that how many people are reaching out to others and saying, I know you're a target because you're black, you're brown, and how can I support you, protect you? And they're working together to bring out a lot of kindness, which is, I think we need to get that message across, that it's actually a tiny minority that are inflicting hatred and violence, and that most people, their natural way is to be compassionate and kind. And I think that's the way out of it, isn't it?
And has your journey over the last 25 years convinced you that on the whole, human beings do want to be empathetic, that they have got the imagination to perceive what it might be like to be somebody other than themselves, and that they do want to reach out in generosity and friendship and kindness where possible? Or have you come to a more pessimistic view about human beings?
But I guess it's 41 years of really being on this journey now, and I think having hope and being positive is, for me, part of my sort of non-violent work. Like, I do believe in humanity, and the days when I struggle with that, and I have days like that where the evidence is that things are not going great, I then look after myself, and I might take time out, or I'm really into self-care these days, and finding ways to help myself be back to a place where I have hope again, which is my natural state of believing that we can create a future where our children are safe. And when I say our children, I mean the children around the whole planet, because I think we're all connected, and that if people are suffering in one country, then we're all being affected by it. And I do believe that world is possible, and maybe the evidence right now doesn't look like that. But then I also look for evidence of people who are incredibly empathic, who are so kind, like all my peace heroes, and they help me as well when things are difficult. We can look for evidence of miracles and serendipity and kindness, or we can look for evidence of hatred and destruction. And I don't deny that the pain is there, because I see it, I hear it. But I do believe change can happen.
Yes, and I mean, like you, I can hardly put on the news sometimes at the moment because I never know what's going to come my way when I listen. But I was talking last night and reminding people of the story of Mr. Must, who stood outside the White House during the Vietnam War, day in, day out, holding a candle. He was a one-person protest. And a reporter eventually went up to him, you probably know this, Joe, he went up to him and said, "Do you really think that you're going to change the country by standing there holding a candle?" And he said, "Oh, I'm not standing here to change the country, I'm standing here to ensure that the country doesn't change me."
Oh, wow, yeah.
And I think at the moment we need to hear that story and find other reserves from which we should be drawing than those who have a lot of microphones and power. So finally, because time is coming to an end here, sadly, but you've started, I think in 2009, the Building Bridges for Peace charity.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about the charity and its work, and then I just want to finally ask you after that about us and what you feel we can do at the moment for the cause of reconciliation and peace. But perhaps you could just tell us a bit about the charity first.
Yes. My charity has been, till recently, mainly me doing the work, and with Patrick as well, but I do a lot on my own. The funding's been hard to get over the years, but without much resources, I've travelled many different countries. I've done a lot of work in Northern Ireland, and I've developed workshops for schools for young people to be positive change makers. I always start with my story wherever I am, because it does two things. One, it makes people know why it's me, why I'm here, and two, it creates a trust and a safety. And people feel seen. I can go into schools with 14, 15-year-olds and they'll feel seen in my story. And then I can then take them on a journey. And I think young people have inherited a very difficult world. And for them to know that despite the grievances, they can be positive change makers is really important. So the charity is there for me to work in every country in the world. And recently, I've been working with a filmmaker with a new documentary, Imad Karam, and Dr. Imad, and he's now taken over the role of CEO. His family's he's from Gaza, so he brings his own story. And I'm looking at another 10 years of doing this work before I retire. And I want to, I suppose, deepen my impact. So we're looking at what can be done. So I've been very grassroots. So I'm looking at how to make change on other levels. And it's mainly by invitation I respond to. For me, it's all about relationships. I partner with a lot of organizations, and I'm always up for new opportunities to make a difference. So if anyone's listening, then just get in touch.
Yeah. And so finally, this restless question that many of us will be left with, I think, listening to you is, so what can I do? You are, a very inspiring person, and your story is inspiring. But how do we begin to translate in our day-to-day lives this same desire for reconciliation, for peace, for understanding other human beings other than ourselves? Have you got a few tips?
I wish I'd finished my book and it was published. So the short answer is, I think we're all positive change makers. We can all be that. We can all make a difference, and we can ask ourselves, what can I do right now? It's about kindness, it's about reaching out. It's about, when we hear stories of terrible violence, it's very easy to start thinking other people are evil and they're enemies, and we start the dehumanization ourselves. And we can stop that thinking. We can get curious and go, okay, I'm being told this story, but what else is happening here? Open up to maybe a different story. And we can learn to communicate others without blaming and shaming them, and instead recognize that our anger is actually our anger. It's our anger to heal, to transform. If we make other people responsible for our anger, we're hurt twice: once from whatever happened, and two, that we're giving our power away to someone else. And for me, it's about taking our power back, saying, I had no choice over what happened to me, whenever it was. I can choose how I respond. And I can choose to respond in a way that is not going to bring any more violence in the world. It will actually transform my anger and my pain into something which ends up being compassion. And it's a journey that we all have to navigate. There isn't like one map for all of us. What transforms and helps me will be different from what's going to help you. But by saying, I'm going to find a way, I'm going to empower myself to make a difference, I think that's how it starts.
Well, those of us that night where you came to the cathedral were so helped and, as I say, inspired by you, and I know that many others now listening to this will also be. Thank you for finding the time to speak with me today, and congratulations on your CBE, so well deserved, and all very best wishes, and lots of energy and power to you for the Building Bridges for Peace charity. And I know that many people will be looking that up after they hear this podcast. So, Jo, thank you so much, and we wish you a really fulfilling new year.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this talk, and the serendipity that happened with you with the taxi and that happened with me. It can happen to anyone at that moment, and life can be absolutely incredible. And thank you for reminding me. And I've really loved our chat. So thank you.
Thank you. I hope paths cross again.
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. And,
lovely.
People will be really helped by it.
Fantastic. Lovely to see you again. Thank you.
Jo.